What are you sitting for? It's common sense for a wife to stand up. 7 months pregnant. At a family gathering, I felt a tightening in my belly and sat down. The one who kicked my belly was my husband, David. Hey, David, what the hell are you thinking? What's it to you? It's so annoying. Besides, it's probably just a girl in there anyway. Chris raised his voice at David. But David retorted without a second thought and completely disregarded my feelings, arrogantly brushing it off. I glared at David as he walked away. Unaware of my stare, David smirked and took his seat. But my gaze shifted to a figure standing up in front of David. This person began walking towards the seated David. What? Then, something happened with that figure and David. My name is Becky Williams. I'm a 30-year-old housewife. After college, I moved to the city from a distant countryside and found a job. I got married 2 years ago and am currently pregnant with our first child. I met my husband, David, at work. David is the son of the president of a company that my firm did business with. Although David is the second son, he now works as an executive in the company. He's an elite, having graduated from a foreign university. However, there are rumors that his elder brother, Chris, might become the company's president. While David isn't the heir, he seems intent on working in the company long term. At first, I wondered why someone like him would be interested in someone like me. Nevertheless, David's persistent pursuit was relentless, and eventually, I gave in and we began dating. David was very kind, and his company was well established and stable. I found myself increasingly attracted to him and decided to marry him. After getting married, I quit my job. This decision was influenced by my mother-in-law, Maggie. It's natural for a woman to stay at home once she's married. Besides, the mother should raise the child until at least the age of 3. When I announced my pregnancy, Maggie's first words were exactly that. Apparently, she didn't like that Chris' wife, Emma, continued working even after giving birth. It's pitiful to leave kids in daycare. Having the child in daycare while working makes our company look unstable. Whenever we visited, Maggie constantly complained about Emma. Hearing this, David never stopped his mother and even added, "My brother lets his wife have too much freedom." I wasn't familiar with the dynamics of a business-owning family. Maybe there was something going on between the eldest son's wife and the mother-in-law that I didn't understand. That's why I couldn't say anything during those conversations. However, taking my silence as agreement, both David and Maggie thought I shared their views. Their criticism of Emma intensified. Even if Emma doesn't work, the company won't face any difficulties. I wonder if she's saving money to divorce Chris one day. It's never good when a woman has money. There were times when I felt that they went too far, but I was too timid to protest. I had heard that Emma wanted to work because the company couldn't run without her. However, Maggie didn't like that statement. True. Becky quit right away, so I don't have to worry about that. Unlike Emma, I wasn't particularly opposed to quitting my job. So, when they told me to quit, I didn't resist much. But I definitely felt uneasy with Maggie and David, who never considered my feelings. After getting married, I became a full-time housewife. But as time passed, David started making derogatory remarks about me. "You're not working, so at least handle the household chores properly." He'd nag me when he came home. Of course, I did my best with cleaning, laundry, and preparing meals. However, as a novice housewife, I didn't know what more I could do, and I became increasingly uneasy with David around. When I visited my parents' home, I heard, even though she's a full-time housewife, she can't even manage household chores properly. Being gossiped about by my mother-in-law about me. Taking it to heart, my mother-in-law began to nag me as well. "Becky, you really need to support David. Our daughter-in-law is so useless." Maggie began to scold me, and I felt smaller and smaller every time I visited the in-laws. "But at least you're better than Chris' wife. Those two don't even come to visit." Well, that's true. But hearing this, I couldn't distance myself from the in-laws. If I did, I didn't know what they might say about me, especially having seen David puffing up with pride each time it was mentioned. At some point, I began to think I was better off than Emma, the wife of the eldest son. No matter how hard David was on me or how much Maggie criticized me, thinking that I was better than Emma somehow helped me get through. Time passed since our marriage, and I discovered I was pregnant. My in-laws and David were very happy. One day, I went shopping alone. I was shopping for dinner. However, on the way, I felt sick and couldn't make it to the supermarket. I ended up sitting down on the side of the road. "Are you okay?" Someone approached and asked me that. "Emma." "Oh? Isn't it Becky?" What happened? By chance, it was Emma. She had just finished work and was on her way to pick up her daughter from daycare. While some people passed by without saying a word, Emma stopped her car to check on me. Having heard so much about Emma from Maggie and David, I was hesitant to trust her and initially pushed her away. But Emma insisted on driving me home, and I wasn't in any condition to shop. Reluctantly, I got into her car. Emma bought me a water bottle and drove me home. It felt like it had been so long since someone was kind to me, and I couldn't help but tear up. Maybe it was because I was emotionally vulnerable due to morning sickness. Emma listened to my story and comforted me. Later, remembering I had mentioned not having anything I could eat because of morning sickness, she brought me some jellies and ice cream. This is what I could eat back then. I don't know if it will work for you. I was so grateful for her gesture. However, that night when David opened the fridge and saw its contents, he frowned. "What's with all these jellies? And there's so much ice cream. You're not even working, it's a waste of money, isn't it?" I retorted. "That's not it. Emma brought them for me because of my morning sickness." "Emma, my sister-in-law?" I nodded and told him how Emma happened to help me when I felt ill on the street, drove me home, and then bought those things for me. Hearing this, David looked displeased. I had expected him to say something like, "I see, we owe her." But his reaction was far from what I anticipated. "Seriously? Don't make us indebted to that couple." As soon as I finished my story, David responded with that and held his head in his hands. "Why? She helped me, why are you reacting like this?" I couldn't help but voice my thoughts. But David glared at me with sharp eyes. He then slowly took out a trash bag and said, "Just throw them away," and began to throw out the jellies and ice cream. I was in shock. Never rely on money from someone who ignores my mother's advice and works on her own terms. That's what David said. In the midst of the tree, perhaps Maggie's words are absolute. I couldn't reply to those words. Afterwards, Emma contacted me several times showing concern for my health. But I brushed them off, saying I was fine, because it would be troublesome if David found out. There were days when I truly felt unwell and wanted someone's help. No matter how severe my morning sickness was. If I slacked off on household chores, David would scold me. Yet, I couldn't ask Emma for help. Somehow, the morning sickness subsided, and I entered my 7th month of pregnancy. At the last medical checkup, the baby's growth was on track and we learned its gender. So I started making preparations for its arrival. It seems like it's a girl. I immediately reported it to David, but he just responded with a disinterested, "Oh." Men might find it hard to realize they're becoming parents, and David might be one of them. I didn't say anything further. And then, Christmas arrived. Every Christmas, relatives gather at my in-laws' house. Normally, my brother-in-law's family who don't visit the in-laws would come over with the entire family for Christmas. I'm home. Happy Christmas. On December 24th, we visited my in-laws' house together. Happy Christmas. Becky, are you feeling all right? It seemed my brother-in-law's family had arrived earlier, and Emma quickly addressed me. She's fine. Don't worry. Though Emma was addressing me, David responded to her with a forced smile and, without properly greeting her, entered the house. "Becky, I've been waiting for you." I was feeling lonely without someone to chat with. Maggie greeted me warmly as always. Even though Emma was around, Maggie made it sound like I was the only one she wanted to talk to. I greeted her with a wry smile. But an incident occurred that evening. To prepare dinner, Maggie, Emma, and I were in the kitchen. In the main room of my in-laws' house, around 15 relatives gathered, including my father-in-law's siblings. Among the relatives, who had already started drinking, David was the loudest. "Work's going smoothly, Becky listens well to what me and Mom say. I'm lucky to have such a good wife. Everything is perfect in life." It wasn't exactly a compliment for me. It was clear to everyone that he was making a veiled criticism towards Chris and Emma. "Becky, can you bring a bottle of wine?" "Yes." Maggie preferred to ask me for help rather than Emma. Despite my large belly, I was kept busy. However, moving around so much caused some discomfort. Emma was the first to notice. "Becky, you've been rubbing your belly, are you okay?" "Really? You should have said something. You should rest." Maggie responded immediately to Emma's words. Although she was a bit sharp, she told me to rest. Thinking I would be in the kitchen, I sat in a chair in the next room, rubbing my belly and watching the events in the main room. In front of me, Chris was feeding finger food to Sean, his son, with Emma. "Are you okay, Becky? You should tell Mom if you can't do something. Take care of yourself." "Thank you." Chris spoke to me kindly. We then chatted a bit about when Sean was born, his current interests, etc. The story I hear from Chris, who is a father, is very informative. And I can also tell that he is very involved in childcare. "Do you know the gender of the baby?" "Yes, it seems like it's a girl." "Wow. That will be lovely." However, David, who overheard, seemed displeased. He got up with a sullen face. I thought he might be going to the restroom, but instead, he walked straight toward me. "What are you sitting for?" "Huh?" Caught off guard by the sudden question, I asked David to repeat himself. To my surprise, David kicked my stomach. Ouch. Although it wasn't a strong kick, I involuntarily cried out and hunched over in pain while still seated. The shock of being treated this way was more overwhelming than the pain. "Seriously, you're overreacting. It's common sense for a wife to stand, making your mother work while you just sit around chatting. What are you thinking?" "Hey, David, what's the meaning of this? What's it to you? It's so annoying. Besides, it's probably just a girl in there anyway. She'll eventually get married, won't be useful to the company, so it's fine." Chris, his voice raised, addressed David. However, David dismissively responded, showing no concern for how I felt. "Hey, that's going too far." I couldn't see who said it, but I heard one of the relatives reprimanding David. "I've decided I won't be a weak husband who spoils his wife like someone else here. If she's careless, I have to correct her," David said with a smirk and distanced himself from me. "For that matter, you can't even control your wife. She does as she pleases. You think someone like that can control the employees in the future?" "Dad, maybe you should reconsider. I think I'm more suited to be the president. I'm sure Mom thinks so too." With those words, I felt I finally understood what David was thinking. The way he was affirming everything Maggie said. And acting so obediently was likely to get her on his side. For that reason, he must have forced me to behave in a way that would make Maggie like me. I lift my face to glare at David. Unaware of my gaze, David, grinning smugly, took his seat. However, my gaze shifted from David to his father-in-law, Brian, who stood up in front of him. Once Brian confirmed that David had taken his seat, he stood up in turn and silently approached David. "What?" Brian suddenly kicked David. Everyone was lost for words. Even David was stunned, his eyes darting around in confusion. "You're not pregnant or anything, so a kick shouldn't be a big deal, right?" Besides, if the child is wrong, the father in me must correct it. Brian then reached to grab David by the collar. Dad, calm down. The one who intervened was Chris, whom David had constantly belittled. Chris, aren't you upset about all he's said? Chris, however, laughed. Not at all. If anything, I feel sorry for him. What? I mean, why be so obsessed with a title like company president and neglect your family? If you want it that badly, go ahead and take it. Upon hearing those words, David turned bright red. He had always wanted the company and the title of president so badly. He might have felt as though he lost to Chris, who made a comment suggesting he would easily hand it over. Furthermore, he might have felt embarrassed being pitted in such a manner. Furthermore, I believe family is about cooperation and respect. I've never thought of controlling anyone. I want a company where employees respect and cooperate with one another. I'm not good at controlling people. If you, David, can do it better, go ahead. To me, family is more important. However, after hearing all this, it should be clear who is fit to be the president. Chris provocatively mentioned twice that he would hand over the presidency to David. Yet David, the one concerned, turned bright red, unable to find any words to retort. What? But I... David just opened and closed his mouth without speaking. All right, that's enough. It was Emma who changed the tense atmosphere. Thank you, Father, for defending Chris. Brian slightly showed an embarrassed expression at her words. David looked down even more regretfully. David, do you think, as your mother said, that Chris can't control me because I left Sean at the daycare before he turned 3? Well, that's actually the case, isn't it? It's the president's house. So we should consider how it looks from the outside. If my brother thought about it properly, he wouldn't let my sister-in-law work, right? I thought he sure is spirited when he can argue back. I was utterly exasperated by David. That's true. But Chris isn't thoughtless. He also told me he wanted me to quit. What? But I wanted to work. So, if you're going to blame someone, blame just me. Comparatively, I thought Chris and Emma were wonderful. They have a relationship where they respect and care about each other. I now felt foolish for being bothered by Maggie's words all this time. Until the child is 3 years old? What's that about? Was Mother saying such a selfish thing? It seemed Brian didn't know about Maggie's statement. He sighed in disbelief and bowed his head. I'm sorry, Emma and Becky, for any trouble my mother's words may have caused. Please, don't apologize. Hearing what David said earlier, I feel really bad thinking about how Becky must have felt cornered by David's foolishness. Brian, sincerely apologizing to us without any regard for others, made me feel even more guilty. Maggie, who had come into the room, was just flustered at Brian's behavior. I just meant. She seemed unable to bear the situation, muttering excuses. I believe she didn't mean any harm by saying the until 3 years old thing. However, her complaints and harsh words towards Emma hurt her and pressured me. Mother, please don't make excuses. Aren't you ashamed to meddle even in child rearing? Brian reprimanded Maggie, who seemed to finally understand the foolishness and irresponsibility of her words. Emma, we truly owe a lot to your family's company. Of course, you can continue working in the future. I know the company won't run without you. Please take care in both personal and professional matters. Brian further bowed to Emma. But I didn't understand the meaning of that statement. What? Both David and I, along with Maggie and surely all the relatives, were puzzled by Brian's words. Come on, Dad. I told you not to mention Emma's family's company, Chris said, laughing, followed by Emma with a troubled smile. What do you mean? I asked Emma, and surely everyone must have been thinking the same. Responding to that anticipation, Emma spoke. Well, my father is the president of K Corporation. Our marriage has nothing to do with the company, so it seems Chris only told my father-in-law. The entire family gasped at her words. K Corporation. It's such a big company that there's hardly anyone in this area who doesn't know about it. Of course, the company was larger than my father-in-law's and was also a business partner. No one knew the face of the president of that company, who is Emma's father, because he was busy and disliked showing his face. Both Maggie and David had met him as Emma's father, but they probably never thought he was the president. Emma works as an executive director in her family's company. Upon hearing this, both David and Maggie were taken aback. These two had always belittled Emma for working. They probably never thought she was the daughter of the president of the company that had been helping ours. Neither of them could find words of apology, let alone excuses. But today, it became clear. I can't entrust the company to David. David finally heard the decisive words from his father. I understand you care about the company, but a company is its employees. I can't believe someone who can't cherish their family can cherish their employees. David, pale-faced, knelt down and begged for forgiveness. Indeed, Father, you're right. I was wrong. Please give me another chance. Desperate David. But his father, angered again, shouted. You're apologizing to the wrong person. David, shaken by those words, approached me. I instinctively hid my stomach, fearing he might do something. Seeing this, David cried out in pain and knelt down. Becky, I'm sorry. I hurt the baby too. I'm so sorry. Tears streamed down David's face. It seemed he truly regretted his actions. Maggie murmured from behind. Emma, I'm sorry. I said terrible things to you. Emma smiled and dismissed her. You should apologize to Bexy, not me. She's been under a lot of pressure, always having to listen to my complaints. And to the baby in her belly. The baby probably heard everything Grandma said. Startled, Maggie bowed to me. Becky, I'm sorry. Their sincere apologies were evident, and Emma and I shared a smile. But the father-in-law was not appeased. Mother, David, get out. I don't want to see your faces today. With that, he sent Maggie and David out of the room. After silently watching the two leave, a family member spoke up. Let's eat, Becky and Emma. Yes. Shall we? Yes. And so, surrounded by everyone, Emma and I enjoyed a meal. For the first time since visiting my husband's family home, I had a joyful night. The father-in-law's anger didn't subside, and David was eventually banned from coming home. His dream of becoming president disappeared, and while he remained at the company, there was no sign of a promotion. Perhaps because of this, he no longer talked obsessively about the company. If I were to suggest a divorce due to him kicking my stomach, he'd prostrate himself, promising never to drink again. I proposed a temporary separation. Unable to return to his parents' home, David apparently stayed at the company, eating microwave meals and showering at internet cafes. His difficult lifestyle led him to lose about 10 pounds in a month. But he kept working and called me daily. Do you need anything? How's your health? Gradually, I started opening up to David again. I felt sorry for him and told him he could come home. Upon returning, David prostrated himself again in apology. He seemed to have changed. Instead of nitpicking about housework, he actively helped out. Becky, rest. Now, he even cleans the difficult-to-reach areas of the bath for me, who is pregnant. Seeing this, the father-in-law gave permission for him to visit whenever he had time. Maggie also became gentler and no longer spoke ill of Emma. Now, I want to work more for my family than for the company. David now speaks such words. Although I may never forgive him for kicking my stomach, people can change. I believe that with the current David, we can happily welcome our baby into the world.